Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So coming together on Shabbat is always a wonderful time because it's an opportunity for us to take a busy week, whether it was busy with work or busy during retirement when people feel, I'm so busy, I don't know how I used to work because I have so much to do, or busy being in school or teaching. But it gives us an opportunity to pause, to take some deep breaths in, which we can do together just to help us settle into the peace that Shabbat offers. So let's take 3 deep breaths in, starting with the first one. Let it out slowly. Take another deep breath in. And hold it. And release slowly. And one final deep breath in, breathing in peace. And breathing out stress. Shabbat is a gift from God to our people, and I'm glad that we're here today to celebrate Shabbat together. A Shabbat when we have a special scholar in residence with us. Sandy will have the opportunity to give a more formal introduction. I'll just say that we met in Cincinnati when we were both in rabbinic school. He was a couple years ahead of me. He is my friend, as is his wife, and my colleague as well, and I'm grateful that he's here with us. So Sandy Flaxman is basically the chair of the Education Committee, and it was her, she put, was the brains behind organizing this weekend with the volunteers that helped her. And Lee is helping us lead music tonight, so thank you. And also thanks to Travis, who is streaming on YouTube. So everybody who is streaming, we wish you Shabbat Shalom as well. We will start with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. I invite you to turn to page 3.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who brings the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher gerashanu b'mitzvotah b'tziyanu b'hagnek ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the lights of Shabbat.
Amen. So we'll continue with the singing of Ma Yafeh Hayom, which can be found on the top of page 10. How good and wonderful it is when brothers and sisters join together and come together as one.
Ma Yafeh Hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma Yafeh Hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Tonight's service, by the way, will be a little bit abbreviated. Some parts that we normally, certain prayers that we recite are intentionally being left out tonight. Want people to know that because we wanted to have as much time as possible to hear from our special guests. So if anyone was wondering, we forgot that, we didn't forget it. It was an intentional decision. We're going to continue on page 6. And I invite us to read responsively in the middle of the page. We enter the door of this synagogue. May the door of this synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship.
May it welcome all who have cares to unburden, thanks to express, hopes to nurture.
May the door of this synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity.
May his threshold be no stumbling block to young or straying feet.
May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness.
May this synagogue be, for all who enter, the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life.
And now we're going to continue on page 28 as I ask the congregation to please rise for the Baruch Hu, our call to worship. As we join together in Hebrew on page 30 with our blessing for creation, Ma'ariv, Aravim, we join together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro Ma'ariv Aravim, b'chokhmah poteach she'arim, u'bitvuna mishaneh itim, u'machalif et hazmanim, Umisader et hakochavim, b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono, borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, uma'avir yom u'mevi layla, umavdil ben yom u'vein layla, Adonai tzivaot shemo, el chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, HaMa'ariv Aravim. And on page 32, we have Ahavat Olam, which talks about God's love for us and how God gave us the Torah as a loving gift. Lee will chant a tune that is known, but not one that we regularly do here. But if you know it, feel free to join along. Page 32.
Ahavat olam beit Yisrael, amcha haveta, Torah u'mitzvot, chokim u'tishpatim otanu limadeta. Ken Adonai Eloheinu, b'shachebenu uvkumeinu נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ומצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגעים ולילה, ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל.
Amen. I invite the congregation to please rise as we continue with Shema Yisrael, the watchword of our faith. In Judaism, we have so many different names for God, and each name describes a different attribute of God. So however we understand God, or even if we use a word different than God, such as creator or wellspring of life, whatever we connect with, this is an opportunity to connect with that part of us, that inner spiritual being, connecting with the divine presence. We continue with Shema Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Please be seated. Noah will lead us in V'ahavta, page 36. I invite you to join along with her.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Thank you, Noah. We continue on page 39, responsively in the middle of the page. And this is particularly relevant now where there's so much violence, there's so much hatred, and hate speech is on the rise. A time when there's so much violence and pain. We need to remind ourselves of that, not because we like it, because we need to use that to motivate us to continue to do more acts of love and kindness. Even small things make a difference to make this world a better place for all of God's children. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, Adonai, there is one God in heaven and earth.
The high heavens declare your glory. May earth reveal your justice and love.
From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way.
Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces.
Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed.
Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be at one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea.
As we will now, with the words found on page 40, Mi Chamocha, words found in the book of Exodus, words our people sang after the sea of reeds split, but words that we want others to be able to say in their own modern day world when they feel that they have been freed and redeemed from those who oppress them.
Yataira bim bam, yataira bim bam, yataira bim bam, yataira bim bam, hi dai 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 dai, yataira bim bam, hi dai 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 dai, yataira bim bam, mi chamocha elim Adonai. Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, norat hilod osef ele, norat hilod osef ele, malechutecha ra'u anecha, okei hayam lifnei Moshe, ze'eli anu yameru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
And let's join together on the top of page 55 because there are so many people who could benefit from these words that we'll say together on this Shabbat. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. And on page 60, we find Shalom Rav, our prayer for peace. It's a prayer that we continually repeat week after week because we know that peace between human beings is what God wants for us. We know that animals, they don't just attack each other for no reason. There aren't senseless attacks, but humans do. Humans can be violent and hurtful and destructive. And we pray for peace, and I pray that all of us feel an increased measure of shalom, of peace, on this Shabbat.
Shalom Rahava Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam Ki Ata Hu Melech Adon Lecho HaShalom Ki Ata Hu Melech Adon Lecho HaShalom Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam Bechol Le'anecha Levarech Et Amcha Yisrael B'cho ed u'b'cho sha'ah b'shlomecha. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam, Tasim Leolam.
We now call to mind our loved ones who are in need of prayers of healing, healing of body, mind, or spirit. Our prayers are with Lev Dickerman, Leonard Glazier, Jim Todd, Larry Goldwyn, Rich Goldwyn, Donna Gould, Mike Sheehan, Maggie Barbieri, Brad Parkins, Erin McElvin. If you have loved ones who you'd like us to keep in our prayers tonight, please say their names aloud as my eyes meet yours. We ask that God be a source of comfort and that we be a source of comfort doing what we can to help our loved ones during their time of need. As we join together in our Mishaberach prayer for healing, which can be found in the middle of page 253.
Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
We continue now with Tefillat Halev, the prayers of our own hearts, guided by the words on page 62 or 63 for our own sentiments.
Ose shalom bimromav, hoyase shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen. Hose shalom bimromav, hoyase shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen. Hose shalom bimromav, hoyase shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen. Hose shalom bimromav, hoyase shalom aleinu, ve'yakol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen.
Thank you, Lee, for leading us in music thus far. So now it's my pleasure to invite Sandy Flaxman to the bima so she can introduce our guest speaker.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I want to thank everybody for coming to this fabulous event we're having tonight. I'd like to say first, it has been a joy for the women of Temple Shalom to sponsor this pre-Shabbat Oneg, as well as tomorrow's Kiddush Luncheon. You are most welcome to join us tomorrow, even if you haven't made a reservation. In addition, we are delighted to sponsor next week No Shabbat Dinner. I would like to thank, for just this evening, tomorrow is a longer list, I would like to thank and send kudos to the following people: Paul O'Connell, Frank Gersh, Ellen Gray, Cookie Honigberg, Joan Epstein, Kathy Carr, Hetty Title, Ross Schaefer, who did all the beautiful flowers for us, Cindy Phelps, Robin Scarborough, who was your wine server, and all those wonderful last-minute helpers who just joined in at the last minute. And I'd also like to thank Cynthia Canada, who helped us with the local publicity, and to Slava and Elizabeth for putting up with me. And boy, did they. Okay. Now it's my pleasure to give you a little information about a connection we made with the Institute of Southern Jewish Living. This program is organized in partnership with the Godring Woldenberg Institute of Southern Jewish Life. Founded in 2000 and based in Jackson, Mississippi, the ISJL supports, connects, and celebrates Jewish life in the South. The ISJL provides a visionary model of regional cooperation through which communities large and small assume a shared responsibility for Jewish life. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Joshua Garroway, PhD, who serves as Professor of Early Christianity and the Second Commonwealth at HUC-JIR. That's hard for me to say. Dr. Garroway earned his doctorate from the Religious Studies Department at Yale University and was ordained at the Cincinnati campus of HUC-JIR. His first book, Paul's Gentile Jews, Neither Jew nor Gentile, but Both, explores the ways in which Paul's epistle to the Romans constructs Jewish identity and the role played by the construction of the ensuing emergence of Christianity. His second book offers a revisionist understanding of the origins of the Greek. Evangelion. Thank you.
That's where we get the word evangelical.
Thank you. Usually translated as gospel in early Christianity. Dr. Garroway is a native of Rochester, New York. He currently lives in Pasadena, California, with his wife, Christian Henriksen Garroway, and their 3 young boys. And tonight he's going to give us a little information about the origins of Christianity and its parting with Judaism. Rabbi Garroway.
That's why I say never do the bio on the internet. No one knows the word evangelion. Okay, push this in here. Okay, can people hear me? Yeah. Okay. First I have to do the eye thing, because I'm now in my mid-40s, and I never know if I should try through the glasses or without the glasses. This looks like it's going to work. Before I begin, I want to say 4 things. It will be somewhat quick. First, thank yous. The same kinds of thank yous you just heard, but my personal thanks to the rabbi, the education director, the chazan for his beautiful prayers, the president of the synagogue who's lending me her car for the weekend, all of you for coming. I live in the ivory tower, but I love to teach Jews. So the opportunity to come out of the tower, fly across the country, and be with you for this weekend, it means the world to me. Second, I want to thank you specifically for bringing me to Louisville, which I think is my spirit city. 3 of my favorite things in the world are bourbon, baseball, and horse racing. I take my kids to Santa Anita all the time. I taught them how to handicap ponies. When we go to Vegas, I sit in the sports book and they sit in Starbucks, and I run out the race sheet to them and they pick the horses, and then I go bet on them, and they watch the screens from Starbucks, and we've been asked to leave a number of times. But to be in Louisville, which is the mecca of horse racing, the only other thing I love in life is opera. So if you tell me that there's some world-class opera in Louisville that I don't know about, I may be retiring here. Thank you for bringing me. Third, I'm giving a sermon tonight, but it's also a lecture. It's always a little bit weird when the scholar comes and speaks in place of the sermon, because I'm never quite sure if I should be more sermon-like and rabbi-like or more lecture-like and professor-like. So I've tried to strike a balance. If you find what I say a little too preachy or a little too informative, I apologize. I'm doing my best to do a little bit of both. And then lastly, I have a habit when I do these things of telling people in advance about how long I'm going to speak for. And that's because I've sat through a number of lectures that I couldn't wait for them to end. And I look at my watch and think, when is this guy going to end? You know when I'm going to end, because I'm telling you right now, I will be speaking for about 23 minutes. So on my clock, that means that I should be finishing up a little bit before the 2. So if you get bored, if you can't figure out what's going on, you just can't wait for it to end, just hold tight. I'll be done by the time we're on the 2. So I remember the day I was outed as the tooth fairy. It was about 7 years ago. We had 3 kids, 7, 5, and 3 at the time, and the 5-year-old had just heard from a kid in kindergarten that it's actually your parents who leave the dollar bill beneath your pillow when you lose a tooth. Apparently he wasn't so sure, so when he lost a tooth a few weeks later, he set up a sting operation. He told his older brother, the lighter sleeper in the top bunk, to holler if he heard mom or dad fidgeting with the pillow. Sure enough, no sooner than I had made the switch, I heard him shout from the top bunk, "Look, Leo, Dad's doing the switch." And I was caught. What I find so fascinating about the shattered illusions of youth, in this case, the tooth fairy, but it could be Santa Claus or the stork, or for 80s kids like me, that professional wrestling is fake. What I find fascinating is that no one ever goes back. No psychologically healthy person goes back to believing in the tooth fairy or Santa Claus or that Hulk Hogan is legit. When we uncover these truths as children, there is some sadness and anger, no doubt, but we move on, and we go about trying to reconfigure the world according to the new knowledge that we can never unknow. And this process, learned in childhood, serves us well as we grow older, because it's not only in our youth that illusions about the world are shattered. In adolescence, we come to grips with the fallibility of our parents. Or if we were lucky enough to be raised with privilege, we come to grips with the fact that the world is not as pristine as we once thought. In adulthood, we confront our mortality. That first time we wake up after a day of exercise and realize we hurt in a part of our body we didn't even know we had. In that moment, we appreciate that our bodies are mortal and slowly falling apart. It's upsetting, to be sure, but for the most part, people eventually come to grips with the new reality. In science, I believe that similar developments are known as paradigm shifts. In the 19th century, for example, what's known as the germ theory of disease slowly displaced the medieval assumption that illness resulted from miasmas, from noxious bad air that is in our bodies. Many scientists embraced this shift only begrudgingly. I recently learned that President James Garfield succumbed to his gunshot wound in 1881 because the doctor in charge of his care, still skeptical of the germ theory, did not sanitize his instruments. By now, of course, every doctor subscribes to the germ theory, and it is unimaginable to think that one day we'll actually return to the miasma theory of yesteryear. You may be wondering why I, a Reformed rabbi and a scholar of ancient Christianity, have begun this evening with a discussion of shattered illusions and paradigm shifts. Put simply, it's because I believe that the two religions in which I am most interested in, the Reformed Judaism I live and the ancient Christianity I study, can both be understood as paradigm shifts in the history of Judaism, reconfigurations of Judaism in light of new knowledge or new experience that simply cannot be reconciled with Judaism as it is. I'll get to ancient Christianity in a moment. Let me begin by demonstrating what I mean in terms of the enterprise most of us have in common, namely Reform Judaism. Many of you probably know that our movement originated 2 centuries ago in Western Europe, when French and German Jews were thrust into a new reality. The conquests of Napoleon sprung Jews from the European ghetto, where for nearly a millennium, cordoned off from society, they had clung resolutely to traditional Jewish practices and ideas. Once emancipated from the ghetto, these Jews strove for admission into modern society. And they embraced the ideals of modern enlightenment: egalitarianism, universalism, rationalism, science. And gazing back from this new purchase, these Jews looked upon the Judaism of their past as antiquated and obsolete. They saw in medieval Judaism a religion that chauvinistically separates Jews from non-Jews and male Jews from female Jews. They saw in medieval Judaism a religion that, in their view, obsessed over unimportant ceremonial observances, a religion that clung to outmoded beliefs that Moses had in fact written the entire Torah, or that prayers to God is what makes it rain. These Jews had shifted paradigms. Medieval Judaism could no longer account for their lived reality, and so they set about to reconfigure Judaism, to reform Judaism, a modern, universalistic, rational Judaism that could speak to a new generation of modern Jews. And we are their heirs. And we're still reconfiguring. Indeed, I suspect we might still be at it reconfiguring modern Judaism according to modern sensibilities when the next shift in paradigms occurs, whenever and whatever that might be. But if there is one thing we can say for certain about this reconfigured modern Judaism we call Reform, it's that we're not going back. It will not go back to a medieval, non-universalistic, non-rational, non-egalitarian Judaism because we Reformed Jews simply cannot unknow what the Enlightenment has revealed to us. Reformed Judaism, in other words, is not some collection of fixed beliefs or practices, but an ongoing Jewish activity, a process whereby Jews who have shifted paradigms and become awash in a new set of convictions set about to change what Judaism means moving forward. It's not yet to the 2, but she's already figured it out. Smart gal. Throughout our people's 3,000-year history, there have been any number of Jews and Jewish communities who acquired convictions that made the Judaism of their time appear outmoded, and who consequently endeavored to reconfigure Judaism as something that for them was newer and truer. Judaism has shifted paradigms many, many times. I could enumerate scores of examples, and I'm happy to in private conversation, but let me focus on the one I'm most qualified to address, and that is ancient Christianity. Christianity, like Reform Judaism, was the result of a paradigm shift in the history of Judaism. That is my point here this evening. To detail all of the causes and contours and developments in this paradigm shift would require a 1,000-page book or several, not a 23-minute sermon. So I hope to make our time together productive by focusing on the one specific figure, the figure I think is most responsible for the paradigm shift that brought Christianity into the world. He was a first-century Jew from southeastern Turkey named Paul. Paul, to my mind, is one of the most interesting Jews in history. I've dedicated my career to studying his life and writings. I have named pets after him. I have an action figure of him in my office whose foot I rub for good luck. Paul fascinates me, and soon enough I'll explain why. But before we get to Paul, we must begin a bit earlier in time with the figure you might expect to feature prominently in a lecture sermon on Christianity, namely, Jesus of Nazareth. To understand Paul, one must first understand Jesus. So let's delve in. Leading historians contend, and I agree with them, that Jesus of Nazareth was what historians of first-century Judaism call an apocalyptic Jew. Apocalyptic Jews, and there were many of them in the first century, believed that the world as we know it was about to end. These Jews were tired of living beneath the thumbscrews of foreign nations. First the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, and then the Romans. And one day soon, they believed, God would intervene into history, conquer the mighty Romans, judge between the righteous and the wicked in the world, and then transform the world into some profound new reality. If you're saying, that sounds like the Christian book of Revelation, where do you think they got it from? Assisting God in this regard would be a Messiah, a descendant of King David who would lead the political redemption of the Jewish people on earth. For reasons we will never know, a young man from Nazareth in the Galilee became enamored with this apocalyptic thinking. He may even have thought that he, with God's help, would be that Messiah who would spearhead the Jewish redemption. And so, having gathered 12 disciples, he set about to proclaim the imminent arrival of this new world order. Like others who did so, and there were many others who did so, Jesus was charismatic, claiming to manifest the forthcoming power of God by healing the sick and exorcising demons and performing wondrous feats. It should come of no surprise, however, that proclaiming a new world order is often perceived as a threat to the established world order. And so, to make a very long story very short, after a year or so, Jesus was executed by the Romans in Jerusalem, like many others before and after him, for threatening the hegemony of the empire. Ordinarily, that would be the end of the story. The death of the leader usually means the death of the movement. But history took a different course, as you know. His inner circle, led by Jews named Kephas, Yaakov, and Yochanan. They'd later become known as St. Peter, St. James, and St. John. They came to believe that Jesus was, in some way, shape, or form, still alive. God had brought Jesus back to life, and he appeared to them again in some way, shape, or form. Now, let me be very clear. I do not believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I am a Jew. I am a rational Jew. I don't believe people come back to life once they're dead. I apologize for the light eye contact there. These are words I really have to get right. But I do believe that the disciples believed that God had raised him from the dead. I do. And therefore, I don't fault them for trying to make sense of what must have been a profound experience. Peter, James, and John, and the others became convinced that Jesus' resurrection meant that he was, in fact, God's Messiah, and that he would return in short order to complete the redemption of Israel. His death, they figured, was intended by God to prepare Jews for the imminent final judgment. Most Jews, on their reckoning, were sinners and would never pass judgment before God. By undergoing a baptism, an immersion in water, Jews could symbolically die and be revived just like Jesus was. And then they could ensure that their sins were cleansed in advance of the final judgment. And so the disciples set about proclaiming the imminent return of the resurrected Jesus and baptizing every Tom, Dick, and Harry they could find. Or better yet, every Shaul, David, and Shlomo they could find, because they approached Jews exclusively. They trotted from synagogue to synagogue, telling as many Jews as possible that God's Messiah had come, had died, and had been raised from the dead. It didn't go very well. For most Jews, the message of the disciples was, to put it bluntly, absurd. To say that God's Messiah had come, okay, and died ignominiously on a cross made no sense to most Jews. The Messiah was supposed to triumph, to crush the Roman Empire, to redeem the Jewish people. The message of the disciples was simply not compelling to most Jews. And were it not for a smart, stubborn, impassioned Jews the disciples might have come across in Damascus, I have no doubt that their Jesus movement would have fizzled out quite quickly. Were it not for that smart, stubborn, impassioned Jew, Paul, there would have been no paradigm shift in Judaism. There would be no Christianity. It was Paul who ultimately made best sense of it all. Now, you may know that Paul initially responded to the disciples in the same way as nearly every other Jew. He thought the idea of a crucified Messiah was absurd. He even persecuted them for preaching as much. But in a turn of events that Caravaggio has famously depicted and that would shape the course of history for centuries, Paul changed his mind. What actually happened to Paul is anybody's guess. In one of his letters, he says that God revealed the risen Jesus to him, whatever that means. But once he became convinced that Jesus had, in fact, been resurrected from the dead, and that Jesus was, in fact, returning imminently to judge the world, Paul could not unknow that new reality. He couldn't turn back. His paradigm had shifted. And so he set out to understand how Judaism might be reconfigured to conform with this new reality. His solution differed from the disciples who preceded him, and it was his reconfiguration of Judaism that would become Christianity as we now know it. What made Paul's explanation of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus so different from his predecessors and so compelling in the long run was the grandness of its scale. According to Paul's predecessors, Jesus had died for the sake of Jews, and Jesus would return to bring liberation to the Jewish people. The death and resurrection of Jesus, in other words, was entirely about Jews, a tiny group of people on the face of the earth. Paul found this rather ethnocentric approach to redemption off-putting, and frankly, for good reason. Paul was well acquainted with the many biblical texts indicating that God's final act of redemption for the Jewish people will involve not only Jews, but the nations of the world as well. He knew, for example, that God promises to Abraham that one day all the families of the earth will be blessed through Abraham. Paul knew that the prophet Isaiah envisions the day when Jew and Gentile will hold hands and ascend the mountain of the Lord together. He knew that Zechariah, the prophet, foresees a day when Jews and Gentiles together will proclaim, Adonai echad u'shemo echad. God is one and God's name is one, a refrain we will no doubt recite momentarily in the Aleinu prayer. And in light of such biblical passages, Paul figured that God's final act of redemption could hardly be limited to Jews. It must be an opportunity for all the nations in the world, no less than for Jews. And so Paul embarked on a new sort of mission, trotting not from synagogue to synagogue with the message of Jesus' resurrection, but from town square to town square in cities across what is today Turkey and Greece. And his message was clear. That God of the Jews, that tiny people on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, in fact, that God is the God of the world. And this God recently culminated a historical process that began long ago in the days of a guy named Abraham. You see, Abraham, Paul taught them, Abraham had been awarded a special covenant with God on account of his faith. But for centuries, this special covenant belonged only to the family of Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that is, to the Jews. Its symbol was circumcision. Its conditions became the commandments of the Torah delivered by Moses. But now, Paul enthusiastically proclaims, and "but now" is a term in Greek that appears over and over again in Paul's letters. But now, at long last, the covenant has been opened to all of humanity. Any person the world over might submit to baptism, be reborn by experiencing the death and resurrection of Jesus, and as such, joining the covenant of Abraham. This was big tent Judaism, if ever there was such a thing. The problem, however, was that Paul's unique and universalistic understanding of the Abrahamic covenant, his belief in the simple, open accessibility of Jewish identity in the end of days, it made him less than sanguine about the Judaism of his past. As Paul saw it, the resurrection of Jesus had inaugurated a final age in history, which rendered many aspects of Judaism in the previous age antiquated and obsolete. Remember those words? Antiquated and obsolete. Most important was Paul's rejection of the ritual demands in the Torah. If it was now baptism that secured one's place in God's covenant, Paul figured, then what further need was there for men to be circumcised? And if the spiritual rejuvenation produced by baptism enabled believers to conduct themselves in a worthy manner, then what further need was there for the Jewish halakha, the Torah's way of life marked by Shabbat and kashrut and other unique observances? Now, to the disciples who preceded him, Paul's rejection of circumcision, Sabbath observance, and kashrut was incomprehensible. They branded him a fool, an apostate, and they tried to subvert his missionary endeavors. Eventually, it seems, they managed even to have him arrested, tried, and executed by Roman authorities. But killing the man could not kill the movement. And over time, it was Paul's interpretation of the resurrection that proved more compelling to the world than did those of his predecessors. It was Paul's brand of Jesus-oriented Judaism, circumcision-free, Shabbat-free, kosher-free worship of the Jewish God, and not the reconfigured Judaism of the disciples. That's what evolved into what we now recognize as Christianity. And so, in this sense, Paul truly was the founder of Christianity. But I hope by this point I have made it clear that Paul himself would never have imagined that he was creating a new religion. Indeed, Paul never uses the terms Christian or Christianity, as these terms developed only years after he was gone. No, Paul was a Jew, and the religion he thought he was reforming was Judaism. He was trying to figure out how the Judaism he knew could continue to make sense in light of his earnest conviction that the God of the Jews had raised a man from the dead. Now, admittedly, the followers of Paul over the course of the next several centuries came to view his reconfigured Judaism as something other than Judaism. They called it the religion of the Messiah, Christianity. And to establish its credibility, they maligned the antiquated, outdated Jews and Judaism from which it sprung, a phenomenon that continues to the present day. And accordingly, Paul has garnered a miserable reputation among Jews, often seen as the man most responsible for the centuries-long Christian assault upon Judaism. But I view Paul more sympathetically, as I've said. Obviously not because I think Paul was right. Jesus was not raised from the dead, in my opinion. Obviously, Jesus has not returned. And in my view, the terms of the Abrahamic covenant have not changed. But nonetheless, I admire Paul for his honesty and his conviction, his demand that Judaism be reassessed and reconfigured when Jews acquire new knowledge and experience from which they simply cannot turn back. For it's that same honesty and conviction and pluck that inspired our forebears in the Reform movement to demand that medieval Judaism be reconfigured to accord with the ideals and the truths revealed by the Enlightenment. And in their case, I think they were right. And there's just one more thing, as Columbo would say, that I admire about Paul, and with this I'll close, because we're on the two. I admire Paul's resolute commitment to universalism, his insistence that Judaism must ultimately be about more than a tiny group of people called the Jews. The ultimate aspiration of Judaism should be about the world entire. And this is one issue on which we Reform Jews can certainly find common ground with Paul, for we too look forward to the day and try to work for it, when all the families of the world will receive God's blessing, when all people will join hands and ascend the mountain of God together, when all people will stand together and proclaim, Adonai echad ushmo echad, God is one and God's name is one. And who knows, if I rub the foot of that action figure enough times, maybe it'll happen. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I'm just going to say, wow, right? It was a great 23 minutes, chock full of explanation, clearly delivered, easily understood, and thank you so much for tonight's remarks. So tomorrow we will be here. Services start at 10:30. Rabbi will speak during services. Again, it will be a bit of an abridged service. And then, of course, as Sandy mentioned, there will be a luncheon, and he will have a PowerPoint presentation during his remarks. So if you are able to attend services and the luncheon, great. If you can come for one or the other, do so, because we want you to continue to learn from our scholar that is here this weekend. So, Toda Rabba Lecha, thank you so much. Sunday morning, we will be here again. Also, as Sandy said, breakfast starts at 10 a.m. The men's club is going to be cooking a great breakfast, as they always do. And again, if you can't come tomorrow, or even if you can, please plan to be here Sunday morning if you are available. Monday night, we have bingo, and for those who go regularly, you know the schedule, and for those who have not yet been participants, if you are able to help, you always need more able bodies to participate and help. It's a great source of income for our congregation, so please see Ed Gould or John Saletto if you're able to work bingo. Next Friday, also, as Sandy said, is the No Shush Shabbat. It's really fun. And in addition to dinner by From Watts, Men's Club is going to be providing latkes and lots of latkes. And Benji Burlow will be here to lead us for our service. So that's at 6:30. Please plan to join us. Sunday, December 11th at 2 p.m. is our mitzvah tea. That is something that's been going on. It hasn't taken place since COVID. But if you are a survivor of cancer, if you are dealing with cancer currently, or have a loved one that is, this is an afternoon to come and be served tea and just socialize and have a pleasant time together. Fran Gersh would be the one to contact if you would like more information, or come see me as well. And then I also want to mention our Tikkun Olam Hanukkah Challenge. It's put out by Tikkun Olam. With every day of Hanukkah, there's an opportunity to do some type of mitzvah. You can do something every day or do the ones that work for you. The email's on the phone, Highlands@Temple Shalom, and your name will be put into the drawing, and there's a $100 gift certificate is the grand prize for the person whose name is pulled. But repairing the world, Tikkun Olam, is one of our values, and this is a Tikkun Olam Hanukkah challenge, and we have more flyers in the lobby, but they're also on our weekly email blast. Also, on December 25th, for those who are not getting together with family or friends, we invite you also to go to Maryhurst and help spend the afternoon with some young women who really could use some people to take an interest in them and be with them and just bring some joy into their life. And again, that's also listed on that Hanukkah challenge. So I encourage you to check your email blast or grab a flyer on the way out. We are going to continue on page 282 as we rise for Aleinu L'Shabeach, which is what Rabbi was talking about, when we hope that the day will come when all people know that God's name is one. Please rise. Continue in the middle of page 290. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy, 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. If you are here to recite Kaddish for a loved one, you're invited to rise when his or her name is read aloud. Tonight we remember Rosalie Eskind, Lynn Goldstein, Charlotte Kolotkin, Selma Kling, Henry Meller, Blanche Wasserman, R.G. Van Wy, Joseph Aronoff, Abram Bayer, Oscar Liebsen, Pearl S. Liebsen, Stephen Mark Rubin, and we're in a period of Shiva, the first 7 days of mourning for Andrew Venetianer. Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be for a blessing, and may they rest in peace as we rise together as a congregation, praising God's holy name with the Mourner's Kaddish, page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, B'yalma divrach yotei v'yamlich malchutei, B'chayei chom u'vyovei uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'vizman kariv yimeru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mivarach le'olam u'lomei olamaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata. Da'amiran bi'alma v'yimeru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, as we say together.
Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. I want to thank Sandy Flaxman for being our Bima guest and also for organizing this wonderful weekend. I want to thank Lee for leading us in music, and again, Travis for making it possible for folks on the internet to stream and to participate. Our concluding song this evening is Adon Olam, and it can be found on page 321.
Adon Olam Hashem Malach, B'terem Ko Yitzin Nivra, Let Masa V'chepso Ko, Hazah Melech Shemo Nekra V'yacharei Kechlotako, Levado Yimloch Nora, Vehu Haya, Vehu Hove, Vehu Yeh B'tifara, Vehu Echad V'yen Sheni, Lehamshilo Lehachbira, Beli Reshit, Beli Tachlit, Velo Haos, V'hamisra, Vehu Eli, V'chayagoli, V'tzorchem li b'yetzara, Vehu nisi umanos li, Menat kosi beyom ekra v'yado, Aftik ruchi, B'yet yisham v'yaira, V'im ruchi gaviyati, Adonai li v'lo ira.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Whatever you want. No,